Captain Sarah Mitchell walked into the Pentagon briefing room early that morning. The room smelled like coffee and paper, with the low hum of air conditioning and the shuffle of uniforms. The walls were covered with maps and satellite photos, all marked with red and blue pins. The men inside the room were talking in low voices, their faces serious. Every seat around the long wooden table was taken by high-ranking officers, colonels, majors, commanders, all men, all older than her. Sarah stood for a moment near the door, holding her folder tightly. She had been in far more dangerous places than this. Deserts, war zones, and secret missions behind enemy lines. But this room made her uneasy. Not because she was scared, but because she knew what was coming. She had seen this before. The looks, the whispers, the quiet judgment. Her uniform was perfect, her boots polished, her name tag shining. But she didn't wear her medals today. She never did. Her most important one wasn't pinned to her chest anyway. It was on her finger. A small silver ring engraved with a Delta symbol. The mark of the U.S. Army's most secret and elite unit. Delta Force. Few people ever earned it. Even fewer were women. "Excuse me, Lieutenant," a voice called out. Sarah turned. It was Colonel Davis, a broad man with gray hair and the kind of authority that came from years of sitting behind a desk. He looked at her uniform, squinting slightly. "Are you here from logistics?" he asked. "No, sir," she said politely. "I'm here for the mission briefing." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I see." He looked her up and down again. "Well, if you don't mind, we could use some coffee before we start." The room chuckled. Sarah's heart didn't skip a beat. She didn't roll her eyes or argue. She just nodded once. "Yes, sir." She walked over to the coffee machine in the corner, her boots silent on the polished floor. She could feel their eyes on her back. The silent laughter, the quiet disbelief. She had dealt with worse in the field. She'd been underestimated by enemies before. Being underestimated by her own team wasn't new. As she poured the coffee, she remembered another morning, years ago in Afghanistan. The dust had been thick in the air, the sound of gunfire echoing in the distance. Her team had been pinned down and she was the one who led them out one step at a time under fire. Back then, nobody had asked her to serve coffee. They had followed her without question. She placed the coffee pot gently on the table. "Here you go, sir," she said with a small, polite smile. Colonel Davis nodded absently, still assuming she was an assistant. He didn't even thank her. He turned back to his papers, preparing to start the meeting. Sarah took a seat near the wall, quietly opening her folder. Inside were classified maps, operation notes, and coded transmissions, all details of the mission they were about to discuss. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same men who had just asked her to serve coffee were about to take orders from her. She looked around the room again. Every officer wore a ring, gold, silver, or with a unit emblem. But hers stood out. The Delta ring wasn't flashy, but anyone who recognized it would know exactly what it meant. She was part of the best of the best. She had completed training that broke most men. She had earned respect the hard way, through discipline, courage, and silence. The clock ticked loudly in the background. The door opened again, and everyone stood. General Marcus Hale walked in, tall and confident, wearing a crisp uniform decorated with medals and ribbons. He was known for his sharp mind and sharper memory. He didn't miss details. As he entered, the officers straightened their backs. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said. Sarah stood as well, quietly, not drawing attention to herself. The general began talking to his aide, scanning the room as he spoke. His eyes moved from one face to another, until they landed on her. Just for a second. Then again. Longer this time. His eyes narrowed slightly. He looked down at her hand. And then he saw it, the ring. The small silver band with the triangle symbol. Delta Force. His expression changed instantly. It was subtle but clear. He knew exactly what that ring meant. He had served with Delta operators before. He had even lost men under their command. He knew how rare that ring was, and how much it cost to earn it. He gave her a small nod, just a fraction of a smile. Sarah didn't move. She didn't need to, but Colonel Davis noticed the look, confused. "Sir, shall we begin?" he asked, flipping through his notes. "In a moment," said the general. "I want to make sure everyone here is properly introduced." Sarah's pulse quickened slightly. She knew what was coming. The general took a step closer to her. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice steady but full of recognition. "It's been a long time. Good to see you again." The colonel blinked. The other officers looked at one another, surprised. Sarah gave a respectful nod. "Good to see you too, sir." The general smiled. "Gentlemen," he said to the room, "this young lady isn't from logistics. She's here for a reason, and if any of you know your history, you'll know she's earned every bit of respect you're about to give her." The room went silent. Sarah said nothing. She simply sat down again, calm and composed, her ring catching the light. She didn't need to prove anything. The general's words had done it for her. For the first time that morning, the others looked at her differently. Not as an assistant, not as someone bringing coffee, but as one of them, maybe even better. And in that quiet moment, before the briefing began, Sarah Mitchell allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Sarah sat quietly in her chair after the short but powerful moment with General Hale. The other officers were still glancing at her, whispering to each other under their breath. A few of them looked embarrassed. Colonel Davis, the one who had asked her to serve coffee, couldn't even meet her eyes now. But Sarah didn't care about that. She had learned a long time ago that respect earned through words didn't last. Real respect came from actions, and she had plenty of those behind her. Still, as she sat there waiting for the briefing to start, her mind drifted back to the path that had brought her here. Sarah Mitchell had not come from a military family. She grew up in a small town in Ohio. Her father was a schoolteacher, her mother a nurse. As a child, Sarah was quiet, strong-willed, and curious about everything. She loved challenges. When she was 16, she joined a local self-defense class and soon became the best student there. By the time she was 18, she knew she wanted to serve her country. But her parents didn't like the idea. "The army is no place for a girl," her mother had said, worried. Sarah only smiled and said, "Then I'll just have to prove it is." And she did. She joined the army straight after high school, worked harder than anyone else in her training unit, and quickly caught the attention of her instructors. She was disciplined, focused, and fearless. But every step of the way, someone doubted her. "You're too small. You won't last a week in combat. You'll quit." She never did. When she applied for the Delta Force selection, the toughest and most secretive training program in the U.S. military, most of her friends thought she was joking. Even some of her commanding officers told her to reconsider. "It's impossible," they said. "No woman has made it through." But Sarah didn't listen. She trained harder than ever before. The Delta selection course was brutal. It was designed to break even the strongest soldiers. Endless runs through mountains with heavy packs, sleep deprivation, hunger, pain, and mental pressure that could crush a person's spirit. People dropped out one by one. Sarah didn't. She remembered the look on the instructor's face when she finished the last test. Exhausted, dirty, but still standing. He had said only 4 words. "Welcome to Delta, Captain." That ring on her finger was not jewelry. It was proof of everything she had survived. Now, sitting in that Pentagon room, she couldn't help but think about how different things were here. In the field, things were simple. The enemy didn't care about gender, race, or rank, only about survival. You either made it or you didn't. But here, inside this polished building, politics and pride seemed to matter more than skill. She watched the men around her. They were smart, experienced, but many had never seen real combat. Their uniforms were perfect, their boots shining. She respected them, but she also knew that when bullets started flying, shiny boots didn't matter. She sighed quietly and turned her attention to the folder in front of her. It contained classified mission files, coordinates, names, satellite photos. She had been assigned to help plan and lead a special operation in Eastern Europe, where an American intelligence team had gone missing. It was a rescue mission, dangerous, high risk, and the kind of thing she was trained for. But she also knew what would happen next. When the general would officially introduce her as part of the team or worse, as the leader, some of these men would question it. They always did. Some would smile politely while secretly thinking she didn't belong. Others would test her, trying to see if she was as tough as the stories said. Sarah didn't mind. She had faced worse tests than judgment. She had seen the worst parts of war. The fear in soldiers' eyes when they realized help wasn't coming. The pain of losing a comrade. The long nights in foreign deserts where every sound might mean death. She had learned to push through fear, through exhaustion, through pain. Once, during a mission in Syria, she had been trapped with her team inside a collapsed building for nearly 2 days. The temperature dropped, food was gone, and they were surrounded by enemy patrols. She was the one who kept everyone calm, planned the escape, and led them out under cover of darkness. For that, she had earned a silent salute from every man on that team. But no medal had ever been given. No newspaper had ever mentioned her. That was the life of Delta Force. Success was often secret, and recognition was never expected. Now, back in the Pentagon, she reminded herself that none of this mattered. Whether they respected her or not, she was here for one reason: to do her job and bring people home. The general started the briefing. His voice was strong, clear, and filled the room. Maps appeared on the screen as he talked about the situation overseas. The officers took notes, occasionally asking questions. Sarah listened carefully, adding small details in her mind, the kind of things only a field operator would notice. Then the general paused and looked directly at her. "Captain Mitchell," he said, "I believe you've reviewed the latest intel. Care to share your assessment?" The room turned to her. This was it. She stood slowly, her movements calm but confident. "Yes, sir," she said, opening her folder. "Based on the satellite data, the enemy position is weaker on the North Ridge. If we insert through there, we'll have a better chance of staying undetected. But we'll need a small team, 4 men at most, and we'll move at night." Her tone was firm but respectful. She didn't over-explain. She didn't need to. The general nodded. "Good observation, Captain." Colonel Davis finally looked up, surprise written all over his face. He realized now that the woman he had mistaken for an assistant was the one planning the mission he would soon depend on. Sarah didn't look at him. She just sat back down, calm as ever. Inside, though, she felt a quiet satisfaction. Not because she had proved someone wrong, but because she had done what she always did, her job. And she knew this was just the beginning. The real test was still ahead. The meeting room was silent for a moment after Sarah finished speaking. Everyone was still processing the fact that the woman they had asked to serve coffee was now giving tactical advice that even the general seemed to respect. General Hale gave her a small nod of approval before turning his eyes back to the screen. "We'll take Captain Mitchell's recommendation under serious consideration," he said, his tone calm but decisive. The other officers quickly began scribbling notes, pretending to have thought of the same thing earlier. Sarah didn't react. She wasn't there for praise. She was there because lives depended on this mission. The sound of papers shuffling filled the air again. The general's aide dimmed the lights slightly, and the projector flickered to life, showing satellite images of rugged mountains, broken roads, and enemy compounds. Red circles marked danger zones. The general began explaining the situation in detail, the missing team, the last known communication, and the narrow window they had to get them back. Sarah listened carefully, her eyes focused. She had seen terrain like that before. Steep hills, cold nights, and enemy forces that moved like ghosts. She had a feeling this mission wouldn't be easy. But then again, easy missions didn't come to Delta Force operatives. As she made a few notes in her folder, the door opened suddenly. A young sergeant stepped in, standing stiffly at attention. "General Hale, sir. The requested classified files have arrived." "Bring them in," the general said. The sergeant placed a thick brown folder on the table, saluted, and left. The general opened it, flipping through the pages until he found what he needed. He glanced up and scanned the room, his eyes landing on Sarah again. He paused. For a brief moment, he looked directly at her hand. The small silver ring that glinted under the light as she wrote something down. His expression softened, a mix of surprise and recognition. It was a face she remembered. Sarah blinked, unsure for a second if she was right. Then it hit her. She had met General Marcus Hale once before, years ago in Afghanistan. Back then, he was a colonel leading a joint task force. Sarah had been part of a small Delta team sent to extract a captured informant. Their paths had crossed during that chaotic mission, though only briefly. She had been younger then, tougher in some ways but still learning what leadership meant. He must have remembered her too. The general cleared his throat. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but with a tone that made the others look up. "You've had experience with mountain operations, haven't you?" "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her answer professional. "Several missions. Similar terrain, similar threats." He nodded slowly. "Kandahar, right? Operation Iron Dagger." The room went silent again. Sarah hesitated for half a second before nodding. "Yes, sir." General Hale smiled faintly. "That was one hell of a mission," he said quietly. "You and your team pulled off a miracle that day." The colonels and majors exchanged confused glances. None of them had clearance to know what Operation Iron Dagger even was. But they could hear the respect in the general's voice, and that said enough. Colonel Davis, the one who had made her pour coffee earlier, shifted awkwardly in his chair. He finally realized what that silver ring meant. It wasn't a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of something few soldiers ever achieved. Delta Force. The general closed the folder and straightened up. "Gentlemen," he said firmly, "let's get something clear before we go any further." Every head turned toward him. "Captain Mitchell is not here as a guest or a consultant. She's here because she's one of the most capable field operatives this country has ever produced. When she speaks, you listen." "Understood." A chorus of yes, sir followed, low and uneasy. Sarah felt the shift in the room immediately. The air changed. The respect, or maybe shock, was now visible on their faces. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just nodded slightly in thanks and looked back at the screen, her face calm and unreadable. The general turned back to her once more. "Captain, you'll be leading the tactical planning for this extraction. I want your detailed operation plan by 1800 hours. "Yes, sir," she said. He gave a small approving nod and continued with the briefing. But even as he spoke, the energy in the room had shifted completely. Where there had been quiet judgment, there was now quiet respect. Sarah noticed it, the way some of the men sat straighter, the way they listened more carefully when she spoke. But she didn't let it affect her. Respect was earned, yes, but it could also vanish quickly if she failed. She couldn't afford to make mistakes. As the meeting went on, her thoughts drifted again, just for a moment, back to Kandahar, the operation the general had mentioned. She could still remember it clearly. The sound of gunfire in the distance, the smell of dust and sweat, the cold sting of fear and adrenaline mixing together. Her team had been pinned down for hours, and she'd made a call no one else wanted to make. To flank the enemy line at night through a ravine crawling with insurgents. It was dangerous, almost suicidal, but it worked. That mission had saved 6 American soldiers, including, she now realized, Colonel Hale himself before he became a general. He remembered her because she had been the one who got them all out alive. When the meeting ended, the officers began to leave the room, murmuring to each other quietly. Some nodded respectfully at her as they passed. Colonel Davis stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "Captain," he said softly, "I didn't realize." She gave a polite smile. "It's all right, sir. Happens all the time." He nodded, not sure what else to say, and walked away. Sarah stayed behind, collecting her notes. The general approached her before leaving. "Mitchell," he said, his voice low, "good to see you again. I knew you'd make it far." She smiled slightly. "Just doing my job, sir." He chuckled. "You always did." Then he turned and walked out. When the door closed, Sarah stood alone in the quiet room. The sunlight coming through the blinds glinted softly off her Delta Force ring. She turned it once around her finger and exhaled slowly. The mission was now hers. And this time, she wouldn't just be proving herself to them. She'd be proving that strength didn't need to shout to be heard. The next morning, the Pentagon briefing room was quieter than usual. The air felt heavy, like everyone knew something important was about to happen. The blinds were half closed, sunlight slipping through in thin golden lines across the polished table. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat near the center this time. Not by the wall, not in the corner. This time, her seat was marked with a nameplate. Operation Lead, Captain S. Mitchell. Felt strange even for her. She had led missions before, yes, but those were in deserts, mountains, and ruined cities. Not inside this clean, air-conditioned room full of generals and high-ranking officers. She missed the dust and danger, the sound of boots on dirt. Here, everything was about words and screens. But this mission would soon take her back into the field, and that was exactly where she belonged. General Hale entered the room again, followed by 2 intelligence officers carrying thick files. Everyone stood as he walked in, and Sarah did too. He gave her a small nod before taking his seat. "All right, gentlemen, and Captain Mitchell," he said with a hint of a smile. "Let's begin." The projector flickered to life, showing a map of Eastern Europe. Deep forest, snowy mountains, and long, narrow valleys. "Our target," the general said, "is a downed American intelligence team. They were last heard from 3 days ago. Communications went dark after that." He clicked to the next slide. It showed a grainy drone image of a small village surrounded by dense trees. "We believe they're being held here. Enemy presence is confirmed. It's a high-risk area with limited extraction options." Sarah leaned forward, studying the image closely. She noticed something the others missed. A faint dirt path running behind the buildings, half covered by shadows. It looked like an escape route. "I see a secondary path north of the compound," she said, pointing. "If we go in from there at night, we can avoid direct engagement." The general nodded. "Good eye, Captain." Colonel Davis, sitting a few seats away, spoke up carefully this time. "Captain, you've operated in similar environments before, haven't you?" His tone was polite now, a big change from the way he'd spoken earlier. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied calmly. "Terrain like this requires silence and precision. No large convoys, no heavy air support. Just a small team that knows how to disappear." There was quiet admiration in the room now. No one dared question her experience. She was speaking the language of soldiers, not theory but survival. The general then looked at her again, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Captain, your Delta experience will be crucial here. I'm assigning you as mission lead, with full tactical authority on the ground." The words hung in the air for a moment. Colonel Davis blinked in surprise, but he didn't say anything this time. A few others exchanged looks but quickly nodded. The general's word was final. Sarah felt a strange mix of pride and responsibility. It wasn't about ego, it was about trust. A mission like this could go wrong in seconds, and the general was trusting her to bring everyone home. "Understood, sir," she said firmly. "I'll prepare the team immediately." The general stood, his expression softening just a little. "You've done this before, Captain. You know what's at stake. I want those men back. Alive." "Yes, sir," she said again. The meeting ended soon after. The officers began packing up their files, murmuring to each other about logistics and transport. But the general stayed back, his eyes still on her. When the others left, he walked over to her. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked up, puzzled. "From Kandahar?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "That's right. You led the flanking move that saved my team. We were trapped under fire for hours. You came through the dust like a ghost. I never forgot that." For the first time, Sarah smiled a little. "I remember that day. You were hit in the shoulder." He laughed softly. "Still hurts when it rains." There was a moment of silence between them, the kind of silence filled with mutual respect, the kind only soldiers share. Then he looked down at her hand again, at the small silver Delta Force ring. "Not many people earn that," he said quietly. "Even fewer wear it with humility." She looked at the ring too. It had small scratches on it from years in the field. To her, it wasn't a symbol of glory. It was a reminder of nights spent cold and hungry, of teammates lost, of promises kept. "It's not about the ring," she said softly. It's about the people who didn't make it home. The general nodded. That's what makes you different, Captain. He stepped back and saluted her. It wasn't a formal salute, it was personal. A gesture of respect from one soldier to another. She returned it, her face calm but her heart full. When he left the room, Sarah sat alone for a moment, staring at the map on the screen. The faces of her missing comrades, people she didn't even know yet, played in her mind. She could already feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She closed the file, stood up, and straightened her uniform. There was no fear in her eyes, only quiet determination. As she walked out of the room, she passed a group of young officers talking softly. One of them whispered, "That's her, the Delta captain the general was talking about." Sarah didn't turn around. She just kept walking, her boots clicking against the floor, her mind already planning every step of the mission ahead. She knew that by sunset, she'd be on a plane heading east, back into danger, back into the place she truly belonged. And though the Pentagon was full of people who now respected her, she knew respect wasn't the goal. The goal was simple: bring her team home. She touched her ring once, as if it could remind her of every battle she had fought, every moment she had survived. Then she whispered quietly to herself, "Let's do this one more time." And with that, Captain Sarah Mitchell walked out of the Pentagon, ready to prove once again that true strength doesn't need to shout. The helicopter blades cut through the cold night air, their steady thump-thump-thump echoing through the dark sky. Captain Sarah Mitchell sat near the open door, her eyes scanning the endless stretch of snowy forest below. The mission had begun. It had been less than 24 hours since the briefing at the Pentagon, and now she was thousands of miles away, heading straight into enemy territory. She wore her black combat uniform. No badges, no rank, just a plain patch with her team's insignia. Delta Force operated in silence and shadows. No one outside their circle would ever know where they were or what they did. Across from her sat the small team she had personally selected. For men, tough, focused and loyal. Each of them had worked with her before on different missions. They respected her completely, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it the hard way. There was Sergeant Kyle Brooks, the team's communications expert, smart, calm, and always ready with a joke when things got tense. Then there was Jackson Bear Turner, the heavy weapons specialist, tall and strong like his nickname suggested. Beside him sat Miguel Torres, the medic, quiet but brave, a man who had saved countless lives under fire. And finally, there was Ethan Cole, the sniper, sharp-eyed, confident, and fiercely loyal to Sarah. They didn't talk much on the flight. Each of them was lost in thought, going over the mission details one last time. Their objective was simple on paper: rescue a captured intelligence team from a small village deep inside enemy-controlled territory. But Sarah knew that simple, in the military, never meant easy. Things could go wrong in a heartbeat. The pilot's voice came through the headset. "We're 5 minutes out, Captain." Sarah gave a thumbs up. Understood. She checked her gear again, her rifle, her sidearm, her night vision goggles. Everything was in perfect order. Her fingers brushed against the ring on her hand for just a second. She never took it off, not even during missions. It reminded her of what she had already survived, and what she was capable of surviving again. As the helicopter dropped lower, the forest grew darker. Snow covered everything like a blanket, muffling sound. When they reached the drop zone, the pilot hovered a few feet above the ground. Sarah gave the signal, and one by one, the team jumped into the snow. The moment her boots hit the ground, the world changed. The loud sound of the helicopter faded as it disappeared into the night sky, leaving only silence and the whisper of the cold wind. "Team, check in," she said softly over the radio. "All good," Kyle answered. "Clear here," said Bear. "Ready," came Torres's calm voice. Ethan whispered, "I've got eyes on the ridge. No movement." "Let's move," Sarah said quietly. They began their trek through the trees, moving like shadows. Every sound, a crunch of snow, a rustle of leaves, made her ears twitch. She had done this countless times, but she never stopped respecting the danger. The forest felt alive, as if it were watching them. After 2 hours of slow movement, they reached a hill overlooking the small village. From there, they could see the flickering lights of campfires and hear distant voices. Enemy guards stood watch near the buildings. Sarah took out her binoculars and studied the area carefully. She spotted a small building with a metal roof, guarded by 2 men. "That's it," she whispered. "That's where they're holding them." She turned to her team. "We go in quiet. No unnecessary shots. We get the hostages and we get out." Everyone nodded. They trusted her plan completely. As they moved closer, Sarah felt her heartbeat slow. Not from fear, but from focus. She entered what her team called mission mode. Everything became sharper. The air, the sounds, even the way her boots touched the ground. She could almost feel time slowing down. They reached the back of the compound undetected. Ethan climbed a small tower to provide cover from above, while Sarah and the others crept closer to the guard post. When one of the guards turned his head, Sarah moved like lightning. She grabbed him from behind, silencing him instantly. Torres dragged the body away into the shadows. The second guard didn't even notice. They slipped into the small building. Inside, it was dark and smelled of damp wood and smoke. Sarah turned on her night vision goggles. Green shapes filled her sight. In the corner of the room, she saw 3 men tied up, American uniforms. The missing intelligence officers. She signaled to Torres, who quickly checked their pulses. "Alive," he whispered. "Weak, but alive." Sarah felt a surge of relief. "Good. Get them ready for extraction." But just as she turned toward the door, she heard it. The faint click of a safety being switched off. Her instinct screamed. "Down!" she shouted. Gunfire exploded through the building. Bullets tore through the walls, splinters flying everywhere. The team hit the ground, returning fire instantly. The quiet rescue mission had just turned into a firefight. "Ethan's status," she yelled. "Multiple hostiles inbound." His voice came through the radio. "At least a dozen." Sarah gritted her teeth. "We're not losing anyone tonight," she shouted. "Kyle, call for extraction. Bear, suppress that fire. Torres, get those men out." She leaned out the door, firing short, controlled bursts. She could see figures moving in the dark, fast, shouting in a foreign language. The sound of battle filled the night, echoing through the forest. Despite the chaos, Sarah stayed calm. Every movement, every order was clear and precise. She wasn't just fighting. She was leading. After several minutes, the sound of the helicopter returned in the distance. The pilot's voice crackled through the radio. "LZ secure in 2 minutes." Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Copy that." They began pulling the wounded men toward the clearing. Bullets zipped past, snow exploding around them. Bear fired a grenade that silenced the last group of enemies. Finally, the helicopter's lights cut through the darkness. The team climbed aboard, dragging the rescued officers with them. As they lifted off, Sarah looked down at the burning village below. Her chest rose and fell heavily, but her eyes stayed sharp. They had done it. The rescued officer, weak and pale, looked at her and whispered, Who are you?" Sarah gave a small, tired smile. "Just someone doing her job." The man nodded, half-conscious, but Sarah could see the gratitude in his eyes. She turned to look out the window. The forest was fading beneath them, and the night sky stretched endlessly ahead. The mission had been hard, but her team was safe, and that was all that mattered. As the helicopter flew into the dark horizon, Sarah touched her Delta Force ring once more. It glinted softly under the red cabin light. She didn't need applause. She didn't need thanks. Her only reward was the silence that came after a mission well done, and the knowledge that she had once again proved what she was truly capable of. The helicopter landed just before dawn. The sky was a soft gray, and the wind bit cold against their faces as the rotors slowed to a stop. Sarah stepped out first, her boots sinking into the wet ground. Behind her, the rescued intelligence officers were being helped out by Torres and Bear. While Kyle spoke into the radio, confirming their safe arrival. They had made it back. The mission was over. For a few seconds, Sarah just stood there, staring at the horizon. The adrenaline that had kept her going for hours was finally starting to fade, replaced by exhaustion. Her arms ached, her throat was dry, and her uniform was covered in dirt and snow. But inside, she felt calm. Her team was safe. The men they had rescued were alive. That was all that mattered. The airfield was quiet except for the hum of the helicopter cooling down. A few military trucks waited nearby, headlights glowing faintly. Out of one of them stepped General Marcus Hale. He had come personally to meet them. As he walked closer, the soldiers around straightened their backs. Even the pilots saluted. The general nodded at them all, but his eyes were fixed on Sarah. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying both pride and relief. "Welcome back." Sarah saluted. "Mission complete, sir. All 3 hostages recovered, minimal casualties." The general returned her salute, his expression firm but kind. "Outstanding work, Captain. You brought them home." Kyle, Bear, Torres, and Ethan stood behind her, tired but proud. The general glanced at them too. "You've got a hell of a team," he said. Sarah gave a small smile. "They're the best, sir." The general looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. "I heard what happened in the village. You held off 12 hostiles with just 4 people and still got everyone out alive. That's the kind of leadership that can't be taught." Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't like taking credit. Every success in the field was a team effort, and she believed that with all her heart. "Sir," she said quietly, "we just did what needed to be done." The general smiled faintly. "That's what makes you who you are." He motioned for her to walk with him toward the tents. The rest of her team stayed behind, talking softly among themselves and finally letting out the laughter and relief they'd been holding in since the firefight. As Sarah walked beside the general, he said, "You know, the report I'll write about this operation will go straight to command. They'll see your name, your plan, your leadership. It's time they did." She shook her head slightly. "With respect, sir, I'd prefer it not to be about me. The team deserves the recognition." He chuckled. "Always humble. You haven't changed since Kandahar." She smiled at that, a small, tired smile. "Maybe just older," she said. They reached the main tent, where a table was set up with coffee, documents, and a few tired officers going over reports. Colonel Davis was there too. When he saw Sarah enter, he froze for a second, then quickly stood. "Captain Mitchell," he said, trying to sound casual. "Good to see you made it back safely." Sarah gave a polite nod. "Thank you, sir." The general noticed the tension but said nothing. Instead, he turned to Davis. "Colonel, I want you to hear something. Captain Mitchell and her team just completed one of the cleanest extractions I've seen in my career. No losses, no mistakes." Davis looked surprised, maybe even ashamed. "That's remarkable, sir," he said quietly. "It is," said the general. "And it should remind everyone here that leadership and skill don't depend on gender, age, or assumptions." Sarah looked down, not wanting to make eye contact. She didn't need an apology. The mission's success spoke for itself. After a moment, Davis took a breath and stepped closer. "Captain," he said sincerely, "I owe you an apology. I misjudged you before. That won't happen again." Sarah met his eyes. There was no anger in hers, only calm professionalism. "It's all right, sir. We all learn in different ways." Davis nodded, clearly grateful for her grace. The general then handed her a fresh cup of coffee, the same thing she had been asked to serve a few days ago. "This time," he said with a warm grin, "you deserve to drink it." For the first time, Sarah laughed softly. "Thank you, sir." She took a sip. The coffee was strong, bitter, but comforting. It reminded her of the long nights she'd spent on missions. Tired, dirty, but alive. As the day went on, she and her team were debriefed. They answered questions, submitted reports, and turned in their equipment. Every officer who passed them now looked at Sarah differently. Some saluted her, some nodded respectfully. The same people who once ignored her now saw her for who she really was. Not just a woman in uniform, but a warrior, a leader, a hero. But Sarah didn't let the attention change her. When the debriefing ended, she walked out to the open air again. The sun had risen higher now, painting the sky a soft orange. Her team joined her, sitting on the edge of a truck, laughing and teasing each other like old times. Kyle grinned at her. "So, Captain, what now? Gonna take a vacation for once?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe. But knowing command, we'll get another mission before I can even pack." Bear laughed. "You wouldn't take a break even if they forced you to." She didn't deny it. The truth was, the field was where she felt alive. Not because she loved danger, but because she believed in what she did. Saving lives, even quietly, even without recognition, was her purpose. As the laughter faded, Sarah looked at her ring again. The small silver triangle caught the sunlight. To most people, it was just a piece of metal. But to her, it was everything: courage, sacrifice, and the memory of every soldier she had served beside. The general's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Leadership can't be taught. He was right. Leadership wasn't about power or pride. It was about doing what needed to be done, no matter who noticed, no matter who didn't. Sarah stood up, stretching her sore shoulders. "All right, team," she said with a grin. "Let's get some rest. We've earned it." As they walked off toward their quarters, the wind carried her quiet voice. Mission accomplished. And though she said it softly, every person who heard her knew it meant more than just success. It meant she had once again proved that true strength isn't loud, and real heroes never need to remind anyone who they are. The next morning, the base was alive with movement. Trucks rolled in and out, soldiers carried supplies, and officers rushed between tents with papers and radios. But something was different. Wherever Captain Sarah Mitchell walked, people looked at her with quiet respect. The story of the mission had already spread through the base. How she and her small Delta Force team had gone deep into enemy territory, rescued 3 captured officers, and brought them all home without losing a single man. It had become the kind of story soldiers whispered about, the kind that inspired others. Sarah didn't like attention. She had spent most of her career working in the shadows. But now, every salute, every nod, every whispered, "That's her," felt strange. Not bad, just new. As she walked into the operations building, a young lieutenant holding a stack of papers stopped and saluted her sharply. "Captain Mitchell, ma'am," he said with genuine admiration. "It's an honor to meet you." Sarah smiled politely. "Thank you, Lieutenant. Just doing my job." He nodded quickly and hurried off, almost tripping over his own boots in excitement. Sarah couldn't help but smile a little wider. Inside the conference room, several officers were already seated. Charts, maps, and reports covered the large table. Colonel Davis sat at the far end, looking unusually nervous. The general was there too, standing near the projector, his hands behind his back. When Sarah entered, the general smiled and motioned for her to sit near him. "Captain Mitchell," he said warmly. "Right on time." "Yes, sir," she replied, taking a seat quietly. The briefing began with routine updates, supply movements, communication lines, new intelligence reports. Sarah listened carefully, occasionally giving her opinion when asked. She wasn't used to being in these high-level discussions, but now everyone listened when she spoke. Finally, the general turned toward the large screen behind him. A satellite image appeared, a blurry, grayscale photo of the area where Sarah's last mission took place. "I want everyone in this room to pay attention," he said. "This operation was one of the most successful extractions we've had in months. And it was led by Captain Mitchell." The room went quiet. Every pair of eyes turned toward her. Sarah shifted slightly in her chair. She wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. The general continued. "When most of us were still discussing possibilities, she and her team were already planning the impossible. And then they made it happen. They moved through enemy lines, rescued 3 officers, and returned without losing anyone. That's leadership. That's courage. That's Delta Force." There was a murmur of admiration around the room. Colonel Davis cleared his throat. "General, if I may," he said, "I want to personally recognize Captain Mitchell for her performance. I was one of those who didn't see her full potential before. He looked directly at Sarah. I was wrong. And I've learned a great deal from watching how she operates. Sarah nodded politely. Thank you, sir. The general smiled. Well said, Colonel. And I think we all learned something from Captain Mitchell's example. He turned back to the room. This should remind everyone. Never underestimate a soldier based on appearance, gender, or assumptions. Skill and courage don't wear a label. Sarah's team, Kyle, Bear, Torres, and Ethan, were standing near the door, quietly listening. They exchanged small smiles. Kyle gave her a discreet thumbs up, and Sarah fought back a grin. After the meeting, the general asked her to stay behind. When the others left, he poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. I remember, he said, chuckling softly. Just a few days ago, you were standing in a briefing room serving coffee to officers who didn't know who you really were. Sarah smiled faintly. Yes, sir. That was interesting. He leaned back in his chair. You didn't say a word, didn't correct them. You just let your work speak for you. That's rare. She nodded slowly. Sometimes it's better to show than to tell. He studied her for a moment. You know, when I saw that ring, I knew there was more to you than they realized. I've seen that ring before, and I know what it takes to earn it. Sarah looked down at her hand, the silver Delta Force ring glinting softly in the light. It's not about the ring, sir, she said quietly. It's about what it stands for. The general nodded. Exactly. Discipline, loyalty, sacrifice. You live by those values. And that's why I'm recommending you for a promotion. Major Mitchell. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Sir, that's not necessary. He raised a hand, smiling. Don't argue. You earned it. And it's not just for what you did in that village. It's for the kind of leader you are. Calm, fearless, and humble. She was silent for a moment. The weight of his words sank in. It wasn't just a rank. It was recognition, respect, something she had never asked for but had finally earned. Thank you, sir, she said finally. That means a lot. He stood and extended his hand. You make this uniform proud, Major. She shook his hand firmly. I'll do my best to keep doing that, sir. When she walked out of the tent, her team was waiting. Kyle noticed the small smile on her face. You got good news, didn't you? Sarah tried to hide it, but Bear caught on. Promotion, he guessed. She sighed, laughing softly. You guys don't miss anything, do you? They all cheered quietly, patting her on the back. Torres grinned. About time, Major. Ethan chuckled. Now we really have to follow your orders. Sarah shook her head. You always did, well, most of the time. The team laughed together, the tension of the past days finally gone. They walked toward the mess hall, the early morning sun glinting off their gear. Around them, soldiers passed by, saluting or smiling. For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to feel proud. Not just for the mission, not even for the promotion, but because she had shown everyone that quiet strength, respect, and courage still mattered. She had entered the briefing room as someone dismissed and overlooked. But now, she walked through the base as someone every soldier looked up to, not because of her rank, but because of her example. As she and her team shared breakfast, laughter echoing across the room, Sarah's mind drifted for a moment. She thought about how far she had come, the battles fought, the doubts faced, and the silence she had endured. And deep inside, she knew one thing: true leadership doesn't come from shouting or showing off. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one's watching. She lifted her coffee mug, the same kind she had once been asked to serve, and smiled softly. This time it tasted like victory. A few weeks had passed since the mission. The base had gone back to its usual rhythm. Helicopters taking off at dawn, soldiers training on the field, and officers moving between buildings with reports and orders. But something had changed, not in the base itself, but in the people. Sarah Mitchell had become a quiet symbol of what true strength looked like. She never talked about her mission, never boasted about her promotion, and never demanded attention. Yet, everywhere she went, people noticed her. Not because of her rank, but because of her calm presence. Young soldiers often watched her during training. They whispered about the Delta Force captain who became a major. Some said she had rescued hostages single-handedly. Others said she had led a secret team through the toughest terrain imaginable. The details changed in every version, but one thing remained the same, her courage. Sarah, however, just smiled whenever she overheard those stories. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't need to. The truth was simple. She had done her duty, just like thousands of others. One morning, she stood near the edge of the training ground, watching a group of new recruits practice obstacle drills. Their faces were red from effort, their hands covered in mud. A young woman stumbled on one of the ropes, falling into the dirt. The instructor blew his whistle sharply. "Get up, soldier," he barked. The recruit struggled to stand, her arms trembling. But before the instructor could yell again, Sarah stepped forward quietly. "Mind if I try something?" she asked. The instructor straightened immediately. "Of course, Major." Sarah knelt beside the recruit, who looked up at her with wide eyes. "You all right?" "Yes, ma'am," the young woman said softly, embarrassed. Sarah smiled gently. "You know, I fell on that same obstacle my first week of training," she said. The recruit blinked in surprise. "You did?" "Twice, actually," Sarah said, brushing the dirt off the girl's sleeve. "The trick is not to climb faster, it's to breathe slower. You can't control the rope, but you can control yourself." The young woman nodded, her confidence returning. She took a deep breath and tried again. This time, she reached the top. When she looked down, Sarah gave her a small salute. The recruit grinned, proud and grateful. The other soldiers had been watching too. They looked at Sarah with new respect, not as a famous hero, but as someone who understood what it felt like to struggle and still keep going. Later that afternoon, Sarah walked back to her quarters. On her desk lay a small envelope marked, "Confidential." Inside was a letter from the Pentagon. It read, "Major Sarah Mitchell, you are hereby invited to lead a specialized leadership training program for elite units. Your recent actions have demonstrated exceptional tactical skill, emotional intelligence, and moral strength. We believe your experience can help shape the next generation of soldiers." Sarah read the letter twice, then placed it on the table. For a long moment, she just stared at it. It wasn't another mission. It wasn't another fight. It was something different. A chance to teach, to guide, to inspire. When her team found out, they were both proud and a little sad. "So," Cal said, pretending to sound casual, "you're leaving us for good?" Sarah smiled. "Not for good, just for a while. Someone has to teach you troublemakers how to behave." Bear grinned. "You'll miss us." Sarah laughed softly. "Probably." Torres handed her a small patch, their team insignia. "For luck," he said. She looked at the patch, then at her team. They weren't just soldiers to her anymore. They were family. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but full of emotion. A few days later, she boarded a transport plane heading to Washington. As the engines roared to life, she looked out the window, watching the base grow smaller below her. Memories flooded her mind. The day she was mistaken for a coffee server. The briefing room full of skeptical faces. The moment the general saw her Delta Force ring. And the long, dangerous night in the snow. She smiled to herself. Life had a strange way of testing people, sometimes not with enemies but with doubts. And she had faced both. When she arrived at the new training facility, she was met by a group of officers waiting at the entrance. One of them, a young man with bright eyes, stepped forward eagerly. "Major Mitchell," he said, saluting sharply. "It's an honor to meet you. We've all heard about what you did." Sarah returned the salute. "You'll hear less about what I did," she said calmly, "and more about what you can do." Over the next weeks, she began training the new group not just in tactics but in leadership. She taught them how to think under pressure, how to stay calm when everything went wrong, and how to lead with respect instead of fear. She told them stories, not of her victories, but of her mistakes. She spoke about the importance of teamwork, trust, and humility. "Anyone can follow orders," she told them once. "But real leaders know when to listen, when to act, and when to stand their ground, even if no one believes in them. Her words stuck with every soldier who trained under her. Some would go on to lead missions of their own. Some would face the same kind of doubt she once did. But they would remember her, the major with the quiet voice and the unshakable will. Months later, during a ceremony at the Pentagon, General Hale stood on the stage, presenting awards to soldiers who had completed Sarah's program. When it was her turn to speak, she looked at the crowd, hundreds of men and women in uniform, and said, "I didn't come here to talk about myself. I came to remind you that leadership isn't about who speaks the loudest. It's about who stands firm when the world goes silent." The room was silent for a few seconds, then filled with applause. As she stepped off the stage, Sarah felt no pride, only peace. She had done what she came to do. That evening, as she walked outside, the sunset painted the sky in gold and red. She touched her Delta Force ring once more, the symbol of everything she had endured and achieved. And as the light faded, she whispered softly to herself, "Not as a soldier, not as a major, but as a woman who had found her place in the world. Respect is earned in silence," she said. And sometimes, silence speaks the loudest.